Hello everybody, welcome to our next video blog. So, from 1 Kings 17:17 to 23. Sometime later, the son of the woman who owned the house became ill. He grew worse and finally stopped breathing. She said to Elijah, "What do you have against me, man of God? Did you come to remind me of my sin and kill my son?" "Give me your son," Elijah replied. He took him from her arms, carried him to the upper room where he was staying, and laid him on his bed. Then he cried out to the Lord, "Lord, my God, have you brought tragedy even on this widow I'm staying with by causing her son to die?" Then he stretched himself out on the boy 3 times and cried out to the Lord, "Lord, my God, let this boy's life return to him." The Lord heard Elijah's cry, and the boy's life returned to him, and he lived. Elijah picked up the son and carried him down from the room into the house. He gave him to his mother and said, "Look, your son is alive." Again, that comes from 1 Kings 17:17 to 23. I encourage you to look it up, read the whole chapter. We're going to talk about that a little today. So this Sunday is Mother's Day, and so this week with our blogs and video logs, we are looking at different mothers from the Bible. We began the week by looking at God, at the motherly qualities that God has that we often kind of ignore because we think of God as Father, but he has some pretty distinct motherly qualities as well. Then we went on to look at Jesus' mother, Mary, and then yesterday we looked at Hannah from the Old Testament, mother to Samuel, the first prophet. Today I want to look at another Old Testament woman. She is not given any names in the Bible. She's simply known as the widow of Zarephath. And that's part of her story that we just read before. So in this small town of Zarephath, this woman lives alone with her young son. She's a widow. Her husband passed away at some point, and the text never tells us why or how. But now she has nothing. As a widow, she has no source of income. Women couldn't hold jobs back in those days. They didn't have any income, so she has to rely only on the generosity of strangers to survive, both for her and her young son. But unfortunately, they're in the middle of a drought. You see, Elijah the prophet has called down King Ahab for his ungodly practices, and God has brought a drought on the land. And because of this drought, there is no food left, and so this young widow and her son have nothing. Generosity of others has dried up, and so she goes to collect firewood in town to get what she can to come back home to light a fire and bake one last cake of the remaining flour and oil that they have. And then the two of them, she and her son, will eat it, and as she said, lie down and die. This is the plight she finds herself in. But now enter Elijah. Elijah has been sent by God to this woman to provide for his own needs because he has no food as well. Elijah comes and asks her if she would please give him some food. She says, "Sir, we only have this one cake and it's all we have left." Elijah says, "If you give me that one cake, I will guarantee that God will multiply the flour and the oil, and you will live and have plenty of food from here on out." And sure enough, that's exactly what happens. So Elijah becomes a regular house guest for this widow and her son. Elijah is given a room in the upper part of the house for him to stay at anytime he's in town, and this kind of becomes a base of operations for him for a little while. So Elijah, this regular house guest, stays with this woman and her son and becomes kind of part of their family. Well, as time passes, not much, because he's still a young boy, this young boy grows ill and eventually dies, as we read in our text for today. This boy who was saved by the hand of God from starvation now dies regardless from illness. One would think that this would be a final blow to our belief in God and his almighty power. But no, as we see, God intervenes again. God raises this son to life through the power or the hands of Elijah. And so Elijah is once again, as part of this family, able to allow God to work through him. Now, what amazes me from this story is not just the miracles, though those are pretty impressive miracles. What amazes me in this story is this woman's hospitality. I want you to think about that word, hospitality. Back in the Old Testament, hospitality was an absolute necessity for God's people. Again and again and again, God told them that they had to open themselves up to be welcoming to others in their homes, with their food, with their finances, again and again and again. Hospitality was one of the driving forces of the people of God in this time. But we find in our culture today that hospitality can be in short supply. And in general, as a species, when things get hard, when we get afraid, we tend to close up. We tend to take all these things we're willing to give and hoard them to ourselves, to protect them, to be sure that we have enough. We live with this scarcity mindset that says there's never enough, when the reality is we don't have a whole lot less than we used to. This is why we're hearing a lot of praise for people who are out doing service work and sharing of their time and giving of their resources. When they're not changing anything, they're always giving of their time and resources. But during COVID, people are getting praised for it because we recognize that we as humans close ourselves off when we become afraid. Whether that's a drought or a pandemic, we grow fearful when we feel like we're in danger, and we lose our willingness to open up our homes to other people. And so now I want to clarify something. The shelter in place that we're in right now is extremely important. The shelter in place is something that is a way of our giving to others. So I'm not speaking of legality. I'm not speaking about opening our homes to big parties of people simply to feed our own particular need for socialization. I'm talking about an attitude of hospitality. So not just the act of giving, but rather the attitude inside of us of hospitality. See, hospitality goes beyond opening up your home. Hospitality can be generosity with our bank accounts, generosity with our family relationships, generosity with our time. These are all ways that we can show hospitality to other people. But in times like this, living in COVID land, we find ourselves closing up like clams. This woman had every reason to clam up her life. She was a widow, so she had no protection in the world around her. She was a mother of a young child, and so she needed to protect him as well as her. She was poor, so she had nothing to protect them with and nothing to give to others, or so she thought. But this young mother gives her very last food. She opens her house, adding a mouth to feed in the midst of a drought, and she welcomes Elijah into her family. All of this while drought was going on and everybody else was clamming up. At the same time, this woman, this young mother, was opening herself to the world around her. My mom, as I grew up, was an incredibly generous person with her gifts. She cooked every day for us as a family, but she also baked cookies and bread and meals for other people. And to this very day, our kids in college never see Grandma, I don't think, without going back with a whole tin full of extra cookies to take back to the dorm. They look forward to those things. My mom taught Sunday school growing up. She sang in the choir growing up. She cared for the needs of our family. And then when my sister and I went back to college, she went back to nursing after an 18-year hiatus so that she could help to pay for college for us. So while our house wasn't exactly Grand Central Station with people coming and going and staying all the time, except for Thanksgiving when we'd have 24 family members staying at our house, that was quite a time and wonderful memories. But nonetheless, my mom taught me what it means to have an attitude of hospitality, to welcome guests, and to open up your house to other people. So, questions for today. What have you been doing in terms of hospitality while you live this time in COVID land? Are you finding yourself to be more stingy with your bank account, with your house, with your family, with your attitudes, with even perhaps your relationships? And then once COVID is over, how might you become a more welcoming person? How might you open up more of yourself to the world? How might you open up your house to other people, whether it's for a meal, a visit, or even a stay overnight? How could you open up your finances to the world around you, trusting in God to provide your needs rather than feeling like you have to provide for your own? How could you open up your family relationships and welcome others into your family? There's lots of opportunities for us to be hospitable, and it's one of the primary calls of God to his people in the Old Testament. So let's be hospitable people and mirror this young mother from Zarephath. Excellent. Well, hey, we'll talk to you in a couple of days on Sunday morning at 10:30. You can find us on our YouTube channel, but the easiest way to get there is go to our website, www.libcov.org.